Hey guys and girls, in this lesson, I want to show you how to adapt your candlestick pattern detection to account for gaps in price action. So I've got a couple of examples highlighted here that I'll zoom in and show you what I mean. So here is a swing high bearish engulfing candle, right? Wrong. According to Python script and mathematics and programming in general, this is not a valid engulfing candlestick pattern because the opening price of this bearish candle is 1 point below the closing price of the previous candle. Literally a single point, which is 10% of a whole pip. Essentially the smallest price distance possible. But to the naked eye, this looks like a valid engulfing candle. And so the problem here is, if I turn on our fractal engulfing candle script, which detects swing low and swing high engulfing candles, turn that on, you can see it's detecting a bunch of valid engulfing candles here, but this one is not being detected. There's no arrow above it. And same with this example here. This is a bullish example. This looks like a swing low engulfing candle to the human eye, the naked eye, but it's not. At least our script isn't detecting this as a valid engulfing candle. So I ran into this problem when coding my ultimate pullback indicator. If I throw this on my charts and we look at these highlighted examples, this right here is a engulfing candle that I would personally trade in my own discretionary trading. However, my script is not detecting this as a valid engulfing candle. But if I open up the settings menu here and I scroll down to miscellaneous, here it is, and I increment our point allowance by 1, set that to 1, this setup is now being detected as a valid bearish engulfing candle. The way I'm achieving this is my code is allowing the script to detect a engulfing candle that opens 1 point below the previous candle's close, or above in the case of a bullish example. So in today's lesson, I'm going to show you how to code this into your scripts in case you run into this issue. Not all brokers will have micro gaps in price action, but many do, especially in stocks. This is a little bit more rare in Forex, but it does happen. And it would probably happen in a lot of crypto exchange data feeds as well. So to fix this, I'm going to hide my UPI script, open up the source code. This is pretty much exactly the same code as our fractal engulfing candle script that we created earlier in this section. If I get rid of this user input, it's exactly the same except that we have some comments here. But we still have the same 6 lines of code detecting swing high and swing low engulfing candles. And now I will show you how to add the point allowance code so that we can detect setups like this if we want to. So if I open up the source code to my ultimate pullback indicator and we scroll down to my entry pattern detection, you can see this line of code here. I'm going to copy this allowance line of code, jump back over to our engulfing candle code, get rid of my UPI script, and below our detect valid engulfing candles, I'm going to paste that line of code in. So you can see the comment here. It says, this allows for engulfing candles that don't quite fully engulf due to micro gaps. You can see that it has a variable here called point allowance that has not been defined yet. That's because that's a user input. I like to make this a user input. So let me copy and paste that user input back into the script. It's just a simple integer input with the title point allowance, the default value of 0, so it's technically disabled by default, and the tooltip here explains what this does. It's the maximum gap allowed in points on engulfing candles. So if I were to save this code, it would compile without any issues, but nothing is actually happening because we're not using this allowance variable yet. The way we add this allowance variable to our bullish and bearish engulfing candle detection code is like this. We need to wrap this particular part of our code in parentheses. This is for bearish engulfing candles. The open must be greater than or equal to the close of the previous bar. If we zoom in here on this example, open must be greater than or equal to the close of the previous bar. We already know this is not the case on this bar. It actually opens 1 point below the close. So what we need to do here is say, is the open price greater than or equal to the previous bar's close minus our allowance variable, which is the symbol info's minimum tick. So in this case, that would be 0.00001, so 4 zeros and a 1. Because we have 5 decimal places here, the minimum tick is 0.00001. And we need to multiply that minimum tick by our point allowance. And then we subtract that from the closing price, or we add it to the closing price in the case of a bullish engulfing candle. Let's save our code, minimize the editor. Now watch what happens when I open up the settings menu to our engulfing candle script, pull it over here. If I click the up arrow here and increment this value by 1, we will get our signal here being detected. Click, and there it is. So now the script is allowing for a 1-point micro gap in price action patterns. In this case, a bullish and bearish engulfing candle pattern. This could work for any multiple candlestick pattern that you want to detect, like piercing lines, dark clouds, and other multiple candlestick pattern setups. But for now, we'll just use engulfing candles as our example, since this applies to all patterns. Now, another issue we might run into is that the closing price may not close completely below the previous candle's open in the case of a bearish setup. We might close 1 point above that previous candle's open. If you want to, you can also add that allowance to the previous bar's open. So in the case of a bearish engulfing candle, does the current bar open above or equal to the previous bar's close, give or take our allowance in points? And does the current bar's closing price close less than or equal to the previous bar's open, give or take our allowance in points? I can add that to our bullish engulfing candles as well, but we need to add the allowance in this case, since it's the opposite direction to a bearish candle. Now if I save my code, now any bar that comes extremely close to fully engulfing the previous bar, but is off by a point, will still be considered a valid engulfing candle. Here is our bullish engulfing candle example that I highlighted. If I delete my box here and we set our point allowance back to 0, this setup will disappear because it is not fully engulfing this candle. It's off by 1 single point. Anyway, that's it for this video. Just a quick, simple one here to expand on the previous lessons, as I'm sure some of you are going to run into this issue. And this is one way to solve this problem if you consider it a problem. Some of you who are extremely systematic and rules-based may not want to add this, but for those of you who use more discretion in your trading and you don't need a candle to exactly engulf the previous, you're allowing yourself to have a point or two off, this is how you can add that sort of buffer allowance zone to your candlestick patterns. I'll leave the source code below for you to play around with, and I'll speak with you in the next lesson.